Hello, hello. Thank you all for joining us. Downtime once again. Been looking forward to this. Caitlin Chloe's, this music makes me want to go to sleep. Yeah, it's supposed to be relaxing. We got the little fire going. So let me know how the sound is. We seem to be having some sound issues. When aren't we? I mean, the biggest sound problem we have is that my mic is on.
Fine now.
But okay. Well, so Lance, how are you? How you doing?
I'm doing pretty decent.
Yeah, I was so Operator Starsky, who is the Ukrainian National Guardsman, and he was on the front lines for a while. Did some footage from the front lines, and it turned out he had communications skills. I think when he says that, I think what he actually means is like with equipment, but I think he also has been working in PR, and so they called him back to Kyiv, and that's where he's been. But so he does a lot of programs, and I met him on the Shills. So I went out, we did the Shills, and I was on the Shills earlier, and he seemed to be delighted to. We talked about his appearance on In Time briefly, and he was just like, "Oh, and Commander McMillan knows all the things I don't know." He's like, "I learned so much." It's like,
I have fooled another one.
Yeah, yeah. It's the whole show is just a house of cards, but yeah. Anyways, so I'm looking forward to. We'll be having him on again tomorrow, 1 p.m. We're lucky that he can afford it, although he's constantly. It's interesting. He's normalized being in a war zone, which I guess happens, but it's like he apologizes for the smallest things that under normal circumstances, yes, you should apologize for, but not under. He's like, I may not have power, Nick. If I don't, I'm so sorry, I can't call. Dude. Your city is being attacked. The infrastructure is being obliterated. I understand if you don't have power. I really do. It's just like I could call with my phone. I was like, no, listen, don't. It's like, we'll if you can get in. He goes, if we still have cell reception. I was like, oh dear Lord, I'd love to do this show, but we don't. I was like, do you need to be in the subway? Do you need to be in a? I mean, you don't have to like.
Take ready shelter.
Yeah, good guy though. But actually, I was on there earlier too, and someone had said too, they're like, well, we think maybe it was a boat that took out the bridge. I was like, it was a truck, and let me explain how I know this. So what?
Somebody asked my take on possible nuke orders, and I was going, what is a nuke? Oh, okay. Because it's spelled differently than what I would have expected.
Yeah, I think that's actually a troll of other parties. People have been referring to it as nuke as a pejorative. But I was going to ask you about that. I assume what he's talking about is so we've heard U.S. seems to have mixed intelligence on whether or not the apparently, some intelligence agencies are saying that Putin ordered his generals to come up with options for deploying a tactical nuclear weapon. They did, and he is whether he's moving forward with that or not, I never was able to ascertain, but that he clearly asked and took advice on it and appears to have asked with the intention of doing it. But there's some agencies that say, no, that didn't happen, so who the hell knows?
My sense is, as I have expressed before, I think before this is over, he will probably try it. Simply because as the situation gets worse and worse for Russia, which means his chances of staying in office / surviving become worse and worse, he'll get desperate to try anything to get out of it. And I think he realizes that at some point you're flinging the Hail Mary pass in the last 2 seconds of the game, hoping against hope that maybe it'll work. Because, once that final whistle tweets, the game's over. So you may as well try it. kind of thing.
Deposed with extreme prejudice. I love that.
Yeah.
Dear Lord. I saw a thing on the, and this was because we were talking about fascism. No idea why that's come up in the U.S. right now. And one of the things that ticks me off is everybody calls everybody a Nazi, a fascist, all this other stuff. And these terms have meaning. It's important that we use them correctly. And Trump is irrefutably, in my view, a fascist. And there's this argument, well, gee, well, you know, there are all these, what's his name? Obama was a fascist. Obama was not a fascist, and even if he had been a terrible leader, he would not have been a fascist. A fascist is a very specific set of things. And there have been horrific leaders that weren't fascist, that were, you know, they were all on the left. What's his name? Chairman Mao was not a fascist.
Pol Pot.
Pol Pot was not a fascist. I mean, horrific. I mean, doesn't mean you want them as a leader. So, but a fascist is a very specific thing. So, yeah, we played this. It was really great. Oh my God! It's from I think it was 1948, from the War Department, U.S. War Department. It's called "Don't Be a Sucker." And it shows like a guy, this woman picks him up in a bar, she takes him out back, arranges for his mugging, and then another guy's playing three-card Monte, he's getting his ass handed to him, and then finally, this guy who thinks that, you know, America's this great country and he's got everything that he could possibly want, comes across somebody giving a speech. And the speech is, okay, it's blacks, it's all these people that are causing all the problems we have in the U.S. And he's sitting there going like, yeah, that makes sense to me. And it's the Catholics, it's the Freemasons. He's like, wait a minute, I'm a Mason. And then what seems to be like a Jewish professor from Hungary who was in Berlin says, yeah, okay, you know, you hear this, sounds great, right? I mean, it sounds like he's telling you that, you know, you're entitled to all of these things, and everyone else is taking it away from you. But let's talk. And then so it was a great thing. It's from 48, and I'm sitting there going like, oh my God, it's today. But all this long way to get to this was, this was the long route to get to. I ended up looking up to figure out, you know, how many leaders were fascists and various other forms of horrific. Top 10 worst leaders in human history. Hitler's on there, Stalin's in there, Mao, Pol Pot. I was wondering, in terms of people he's killed, Putin isn't there. But in terms of psychological makeup, it strikes me that Putin would probably be on the top 10. But that's a long history, and you know that history far better than I do. Yeah. How bad is he as a leader?
Well, we have to qualify what bad is in this context. We don't mean whether he's competent or not. I think he's shown that he's competent in some areas and non-competent in others. I won't go so far as to say incompetent. But in terms of the ethics and morality, I think he's from that Soviet-era mindset where not only might makes right, but also might is what allows you to determine for both yourself and everybody else what is right. And the fact that you even dare question the authority means you're a bad, non-patriotic, evil person. You're a terrorist, or whatever term you want to apply. And I think that reflects back on his upbringing in terms of, you know, he came up through the ranks in the KGB and so forth, because that was the Soviet mindset, which was there are people at the top, and we've chosen them because they're the best and they're making all our decisions for us. We must not question anything they tell us because they are the wise ones. We are here merely to obey and enact their brilliant ideas.
especially in Russia. You and I have talked about Russian culture before, which is fascinating. But that's almost a shibboleth in Russia, which is how much are you willing to say things that you technically, I would say no aren't true, but they don't really view truth or false in them. But things that are counter to reality, how much are you willing to say that that's the way they are, either double speak or any kind of the 1984 kind of nonsense. I had told you before. I remember I was in Novosibirsk, and it was a summer camp. It was kind of winter time. The camp wasn't being used, but it was hosting myself and a whole bunch of other exchange students. And I'm go out, and one of the guys is there, and I asked him some question about, I've been looking for him earlier, I couldn't find him. And he's like, oh, well, it had been raining, so I go inside. It hadn't been raining. I'm sitting there going like, what's he talking about? And it's every other word is a lie all the time, and they don't think of it as lying. It's plausible deniability of reality. It's how you deal with the secret police. So somebody could literally say, and there was the great episode of Star Trek. I'm going to use a Star Trek reference. Picard is being tortured, and somebody holds up 4 lights and says, how many lights are there? And he says, well, there's 4. And every time he answers 4 and not 5, he gets tortured. And he's supposed to see 5, and he keeps torturing him to get him to see 5. And in the very end, he gets rescued at the last minute, but he gets asked that question one more time. And says, he shouts in this final act of defiance. He's been tortured. He's naked, barely functioning, but he says there are 4 lights, and they pull him out. And what he admits to later is he actually saw 5. And so
yep.
it's just this constant gaslighting over there.
And you see, a true revolutionary, when they go through that process, says there are 3 lights.
Okay, explain that one to me. That just went completely over my head.
Create your own reality. If they are demanding you say 5, there are 4 actual ones. You revolt against the system and say there are only 3 lights. Yep.
And this is part of why, and you had said this to the Potemkin village, right? I think this is part of why the military is it's like, and there's some of this problem everywhere where it's like they'll say, oh yeah, our military is doing much better than it really is, but they fabricate this stuff whole cloth out of it. So how... There seems to, unless I'm missing something historically, there seems to be a universal failure rate, like 100% failure rate on this type of gaslighting, mind control, controlling, just 100% failure rate. And yet we keep doing it. At least there are cultures that keep doing it. Do they not know better? Do they think that they're going to get around it this time?
Again, definitions are important. If it works well enough that the authority is happy, then it's successful. And I would argue that in Russia, after literally centuries of conditioning, it has effectively become successful. Every time you get any kind of movement from the masses where they're agitating to change the system, where it's not just automatic, mindless obedience to the authority, whatever that is, whether it's the czar, the commissar, the oligarch, you get massive oppression that silences them, and you also get a migration of people out of the country who are fleeing the oppression. But what's important is, by fleeing, the ones who are departing are the ones who have kind of a predisposition mentally. I won't go so far as to say genetically, but mentally, a predisposition to question the authority. And so, in a lot of ways, Russia has kind of done a eugenics program where everybody has become conditioned to obediently do or believe what they're told to. Behind closed doors, they may say, we all know it's total BS. But in open life, they won't say that because they're terrified of getting sent to the gulag or worse. And anybody who would be willing to stand up is basically thrown up their hands and said, the hell with this, and they're now living in wherever.
I think you're the one who taught me this joke. The a Russian guy, you know, stands up and says, "Hey, you know, what about free speech? We should be allowed to have free speech and say what we want to say." And another Russian guy runs up to him and goes, "Shh, you can't say that." And then the next day, they were both gone.
Yep. That's how the system works.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen demotivational posters. You know what I'm talking about, because they have all those motivational posters you see in all sorts of places. And one of my favorites is, it's a lawn with a lawnmower running, and there's one blade of grass that's still sticking up, and all the others are just, you know, golf course level. That says something along the lines of, it's the guy who stands up taller than the others that always gets his head cut off first.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so and so this was. It's weird to see it be so successful in this country, and that's Trump. I mean, you know, when I take a look at Trump's utter denial of reality. Now, I think there's a bit of a difference. Well, there's a number of differences. I think Trump, like most Russians, is aware on some level that none of it's true. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not to him. I think a lot of his followers honestly believe everything he's saying, and that's where the fascism comes in.
But that's the authoritarian mindset, and I think that's universal. I think the people who have that kind of thought process, it doesn't really matter to them how utterly absurd the pronouncements of the leader are. If you are preconditioned to think that whatever the leader says is not just reality, but the best possible reality that you could think of, then why would you ever dare question it? You don't want to have that worldview upset. And we have a lot of people in this country that are along those lines. You know, they dutifully, you know, go to church every Sunday. They dutifully go to the Lions Club or the Elks Club. You know, we're all acting together in lockstep with these little groups that we have to be members of. And the idea of being an independent or individual thinker is anathema to them. They will tell you otherwise. They will insist that, you know, they're independent thinkers and I don't listen to the lies that are put forth by the mainstream media. What they're really saying is, I don't listen to the lies that are put out by anybody that I don't agree with. So anything that upsets their worldview has to be wrong, has to be bad, has to be unpatriotic, has to be evil, you know, anti-Christian or anti-capitalist or what have you. There's no willingness to seriously consider other worldviews. I think that's the key. And I figure, you know, probably based on my experience, somewhere between a quarter to a third of the human population fall into that category. They don't want freedom of choice. They want freedom from choice. The idea of having to make decisions and be responsible for and accountable for those decisions is frightening. So if you can defer all that decision making on somebody else who obviously is better qualified than you, it's not your fault if things go wrong.
It almost sounds like the sort of the alpha, you know, where we talked to about training dogs, and you have an alpha, the sort of leader dog who, and I wonder, and we talked about too. I really did. I became so much of a better father learning about training dogs because I also one of the and some of it was just common sense stuff and stuff that psychologists are already telling us. One thing, for example, I don't believe in punishment, and one reason I don't believe in punishment is, and I couldn't voice this at the time. I always thought it was probably ineffective. It works as a deterrent, but that's all. Once something's done, it doesn't have the corrective effect psychologically that we think it does. And the reason is because it's too far removed from the actual act, whatever it was. So, if you sit down and say, okay, we're going to think about a punishment, so on and so forth, by the time you do the punishment, intellectually they may know that one's tied to the other, but emotionally the connection's not made, and they haven't tied it. That's why a correction, when you're correcting like an animal, is done instantaneously. It's as soon as he does something wrong, whatever method you use for the correction, just let him know, poke him, whatever it is that's guiding him in the correct direction. But it has to be instantaneous. The dog, and people who punish their dog, an hour after they did something, the dog has no way of figuring it out.
Dog has no clue why he's being punished.
And you can say it all like, oh, God. I had a friend who was just like, oh, my dog really does understand me. No, he doesn't. He understands English. He probably understands like 10 words, maybe. I agree that dogs can actually understand the noises, if you call that understanding English. My dog knows about 15 commands. I can do them either by hand. He knows them by hand, so he knows sign language too, I guess. And but he doesn't know. I can't have a conversation with him, and I can't explain. All right. Let's discuss what your poop is doing, sitting on the floor in the middle of the living room, and why we as a family object to you pooping on the. No, you can't. That's just not. It doesn't work.
Woof.
Hun, I think he understands me. We've had a commute. We're good. Yeah.
I love the Far Side cartoon where there's a guy who's, Missy, you can't do that. It's bad. Don't ever do that again. Missy, don't do that. And then that's the real world, and then the other is the dog's version of the world, which is blah, 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 Missy, blah, 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 Missy, blah, blah, Missy, blah, blah, blah.
There's another one I love. It's a mama duck, big duck, and baby duck, baby duck, baby duck, baby duck, scientist in glasses. He's got his head cowed, and he's following too. It says, imprinting experiments gone terribly wrong.
Yeah.
So I think part of organizing for a society does mean that you identify people who have skills that aren't yours, and you kind of we create hierarchies. We do need hierarchies in order to function. So I think we have an instinct towards that. Clearly, again, dogs have that. There's the pack instinct to get into all that training. So, it's still either it's an order of magnitude higher or it's different in some way. But yeah, I get it. I honestly do get the idea of wanting to say, okay, I'm going to follow this person because they're just so awesome and they're so, they know what they're doing. And I saw people, there was a cult of personality around Obama, and it was a little disconcerting. Then again, I wanted to get the guy elected. So I was just like, hey, listen, it serves its purpose.
Or Bernie or anybody.
Yeah,
but I think the difference is, as I said, I think, perhaps 25 to 30% on one end are authoritarian, and you have probably the same number at the other end of the spectrum who are just automatically, I'm not listening to nobody else. I'm the only source of reality. Whatever I want, that's what we're going to do, and if you don't like it, the hell with you. Those are the extremes. It's everybody else in the middle, and we need, for most people, some degree of structure to keep things running smoothly. And, it has to be a benign and compassionate version of structure. Whereas, it's, to use your analogy of dog training or raising kids, you know, you try to explain to the dog in terms that the dog will understand, just as you try to explain to the kid in terms that the kid will understand why you don't want them to do this, and you demonstrate to them that they don't have to do that, and you show them alternatives, etc. That's that benign and compassionate version. And then you go to the authoritarian group, and it's like, you pooped on the ground. I'm going to beat you senseless with a stick, or spank your kids. And they've done polling type, you know, psychological testing and such, and they found that authoritarian families, people, you know, who are from that mindset, are like 3 or 4 times more predisposed to beat their children than people outside of that group. You know, and it's whether it's because you were raised that way or because you believe that that's the only effective way to convey discipline to a situation. I don't think it really matters. It's just that's the result of that mindset leading to that kind of behavioral pattern.
One of my favorite shows, Deadwood. I got a poster of it back there. Have you ever seen that by any chance?
I think I watched 2 or 3 episodes, and then it went off of the free access that I had, so I wasn't able to finish it.
Amazing show. Aside from the fact that it was written by probably one of the best television writers, short of Aaron Sorkin, I think, out there. It takes place in the camp of Deadwood, South Dakota, while it's before that part became a territory. So it's Indian land, so there's no law. There's no laws at all, and so the people going there are going there to make money. But 𝗢𝐴𝐿 is sort of one of the head guys who runs Deadwood, and he's an interesting one because he's a criminal. He robs from everybody he can, but he also is setting up as much structure as possible. And the reason is you can't rob from people if there isn't structure. so he doesn't, you know. And at one point,
okay,
you know, well, so for example, at one point, 2 of his guys go off on their own, and they just rob a family that's leaving, and they kill them all. And he flips out, and he's just like, look, they had almost no money. You got some money, hey, fine. But now word's going to get around that people are running around killing and the roads aren't safe. If the roads aren't safe, nobody's going to take them. If nobody's going to take them, nobody's bringing money into the camp. And we can't rob them. It's like you got to rob them in such a... You can't rob everybody all the time. You gotta have the illusion of safety and find a way to you know, wait until the big fish are here and then take the money. But you need some form of actual commerce so that there's money to take. But the other thing that he says on one of them was, you know, he's opining on the sheriff, who is a really good guy, and all this other stuff. And he's just like, God damn it, if I were that good, I'd want to blow my own head off. Because, you know, who you know, because you can't. And he goes, I can see why the sheriff runs around being a sheriff. It's because he wants to put an end to the misery of being, you know, essentially this Boy Scout. He says, he goes, you know, I learned life the real way, and I'm thankful for every beating I've ever gotten. And it's funny because you could see it in the guy. It's just a character, but you were talking about it, and it's just like he literally, you know, I'm thankful for every beating I ever took.
Oh, yeah. I've known people like that who, you know, I was beaten as a kid, and look, I turned out great, so I'm going to beat my kids because that's the only way to make sure they turn out great, too.
Yep.
Twisted or what, dude?
Ooh, there's a, let me go back to my, yeah, I'll get my phone. So, I'm a liberal. Never wanted to be a Democrat. I had to become a Democrat briefly when I was on the Obama campaign because I couldn't vote for him in the primaries, and he was going to win in the primaries. I didn't need to vote for him, but it's like I was campaigning for him, so it became an issue. But one of the reasons I've been a little hesitant of Democrats is because I like a lot of conservatives, and I like a lot of their views, and I think usually they come by them honestly. I have lost all respect for those positions now, and I'm wondering if conservatives have so often been about military security and American values, when are they going to stand up to Trump? Are they going to ever do that, do you think, or is this just going to... No, it's never going to happen.
I'll get the name wrong. It's one of the late night comedian talk show types. And he was doing a show, and that was one of the things he was talking about. He says, why do people follow Trump when he, A, has done nothing for them, and B, by his actions throughout his entire life, is the absolute antithesis of everything they purport to believe in. And he said, it's because they feel so overlooked, so bypassed, so ignored by the American political system that they would prefer to have an incompetent just because it will so thoroughly piss off the libs that you will now finally feel as angry and frustrated as we feel. That's what's going on. This isn't about trying to get an agenda passed as much as it is revenge.
Revenge for, 40 years of successful Supreme Court and largely successful legislative priorities. So, yeah. Oh, dear Lord.
I know, it doesn't make any sense, but that's what's going on. I think to a large extent, many of them are being manipulated. You know, if you get fed the same constant diet of bullshit that Fox or QAnon or any of those InfoWars type groups are feeding you, you begin to accept and believe in that stuff. And who is controlling and paying for and sending that message? Those people who are at the very top with the extreme amounts of wealth who want to ensure that it's preserved, and they take more and more and more of what's out there for themselves. So, you know, who needs a middle class when you can all be peasants bound to the land serving our interests?
Yeah. Oh, well, that's terrifying. So, yeah, how do you think the Dems and the Libs are going to do coming up? I tend to believe the polls, but people who are smarter than me say that the polls are wrong, and they've got good reasons for it. But I'm curious what you think.
I hate to use the phrase cautiously optimistic, but I think it applies here. I know that the polls tend to rely very heavily on blind phone calling. And the blind phone calling is typically done to landlines, not cell phones. And most of the younger generation have stopped having landlines. So the polls that they're running are unavoidably skewed towards older voters, and older voters tend to vote conservative. Younger voters traditionally have tended to vote more liberal. So if you're completely cutting out that younger perspective, all your poll is going to show is, oh yeah, everybody loves goose stepping down the main boulevard with Herr Trump. Okay. You know, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy to some extent, because then there are those people in the center who don't want to feel like they're being left out, so they kind of go, oh, well, the polls are saying that everybody's voting that way, so I suppose I should too. I don't want to be on the outside of this. And that's what, you know, the experts, or some of the experts, are saying. I look at it from just my personal perspective. We get 3 or 4 calls a day from polls that want to speak specifically and only to my son, who doesn't live here anymore. And that, to me, kind of validates this, because I say, well, he's not here. Can I answer your questions for you? Oh, no, we're looking for a certain demographic. And this has been going on for a month, and they're still trying to get this demographic to verify their numbers, and they're not getting it. So that's why I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that the polls are in error. You know, whether it's within the margin of error or not, I don't know. But my feeling is that the polls are unavoidably skewed because the way the polls are being run in many cases, not all, but many cases, is using the old polling format, which is no longer valid in the modern world.
And we have a super chat, $2 from the Sinister Porpoise. Thank you, Porpoise, so much for your contribution. And by the way, for supporters, we have our patron hangout on Monday, 9 p.m., and then Tuesday we're going to be covering this thing. We'll see what happens. But thank you very much for your continued support, Porpoise. We really appreciate that. $2, 95% chance that substitute teachers will be underpaid. I think she's being very optimistic. I remember working as a substitute. It was 50 bucks a day.
Why are we paying them at all? It's an honor to be allowed to teach in our schools.
God, yeah, I know.
I've actually heard a school board member say that.
I've heard a number of them say that. I was a teacher for a while. I've been told that. Like, why are you complaining about you're a teacher? You get to shape minds, doesn't that? And it's sort of like, yeah, except, you know, I have a family to feed too. Don't I
restrictions
deserve?
You put on me. I'm not shaping anything.
Yeah. I was a fan of the concept of Common Core, but I was around when we were trying to implement it, and I was like, the implementation. I was just like, no, it's. I don't know. I don't know how you solve that problem, but I got outright as DeVos was becoming education secretary. I saw my friends like, have fun.
Let's take the woman who's like the #2 owner of private schools in the United States and make her the Secretary of Education, who then immediately proceeds to try to do everything in her power to close down public education so that we can have more private schools so she can make more money. Oh, makes perfect sense to me.
I had friends I was talking to almost every day, and they're just like, Nick, you wouldn't believe what the hell's going on. I was like, oh, yeah, it was that would have been a good book to write. Oh God. So well,
I mean, to me, that was one of the things that highlighted just how screwed up the Trump administration was, because so many of the cabinet level officials, if you dug deep enough, you found out that they were a giant walking conflict of interest to the jobs that they were appointed to. You know, it's like, how can I use my newfound authority to make myself richer while inconveniencing as many people in this country as possible? This is America. Yay, freedom.
I do have a question for you. I still can't. He honestly has no idea what public service means. He doesn't get it. He doesn't understand it. It's not that he's even got contempt for it, although he does. But he doesn't even actually understand the concept.
I wouldn't restrict it to public. I would simply say he doesn't know what service is.
Yes, I think that's fair. So how I couldn't figure out why I did so. Like I said, everything back there, that is my grandfather's flag. That is from his service in World War II. He was a surgeon. Surgeon in Patton's army flew into Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. So he had to fly over enemy lines. They hooked him up to they basically made a glider. He got in it and flew in and crashed into Bastogne. They had to wait until night. He was getting shot at the whole time until he could go. Went in, ended up doing surgery out of a garage for 48 hours straight. And that's also a story I tell when we talk about triage, because I think triage is an important concept that we faced during COVID and may be facing again, and it's worth understanding. But
oh no, COVID is no longer a problem in this country. It's gone. It was a myth to begin with, and now it doesn't exist. So
yeah,
let's not confuse people's minds.
Oh, thank you for the correction, good sir. Yeah, well, and we're starting back the shows with 𝐓𝐤𝐺𝐼𝐳 because it's like, so 𝐓𝐤𝐺𝐼𝐳, we've been hearing some stuff. He goes, I'll bet you. I was like, yeah, let's talk. Yeah, so Germany now, their hospitals are as overwhelmed as they've ever been since the start of this, and it's gonna hit the U.S. So we've had that conversation. We should continue to have that conversation because it's important, and people need to know. But I think in part because of him, my grandfather, because of his service, I think in part just because an understanding that the only way I can live my life, which includes being a writer, includes being a teacher, includes hosting a YouTube channel, all of these things that I get to do and these freedoms and choices I have is because of the U.S. military. That's the only reason. That's the only the end of discussion. And so, I was never a fan of John McCain's politics. But he was a conservative I would have voted for, at least the first John McCain. The second time around after Bush, maybe not. But nonetheless, but when Trump said that all the people who died in service of the U.S. were suckers, I was profoundly offended. There were people watching that stream who hit me up afterwards like, dude, yeah, I reacted viscerally to that, and I'm curious how, I mean, you've served this country, you've served at some of the highest levels of the military. What was your reaction to that?
No, I wouldn't go that far. Yeah, and I think a lot of...
Well, hold on. If Trump gets back into office, you can if you want to. They'll put you in. I mean, listen, you can be, would you like to be,
all you have
Joint
to do
Chiefs?
is make a couple 100,000 donation to his re-election campaign.
Exactly.
And, it may end up in his offshore Cayman account, but it doesn't matter. It was to a good cause. And he'll appoint you to whatever position you'd like.
You're doing this hard work thing,
sale.
which is for suckers.
Capitalism is.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I cut you off with a joke. What was how'd you feel when you heard that?
Well, I was offended, and I think anybody who ever served in the military or had relatives that served in the military probably feels the same way. To just dismiss it like that, and particularly because it wasn't just because you served you were a sucker. It was explicitly, if you had died in the service to your country, you were a sucker. It's like, how much more disrespect can you do? And this is from a guy who's allegedly heading up the party of, conservative family values, and we need to protect the country, but you're suckers if you go out and die for the country.
As if, by the way, he's a frightened child. When he talks about the when it was like, oh, I should get oh no, that was what did it. Sorry, that was what did it. I just remembered. It was the Medal of Honor.
The Medal of Honor.
It was the Medal of Honor. That really fucking pissed me off. When I was like, I should get the Medal of Honor because I dimmed the lights on Air Force One before our landing. But then he goes to the pilot for this approval. Like, didn't I do a good job? Didn't I do a good job? And I'm sitting there going, like, I don't know what kind of life he thinks he's led, but he's seeking approval from absolutely everybody. It strikes me the only reason he's not. Yeah.
Insecurity is the driving element in his life, and I think that's what makes Putin the greatest spy master of all time, is he realized he could use that. If he could simply make the orange man believe he was great and just heap praise on him, he'd eat out of his hand. Oh, please give me the nuclear launch codes for your country. Sure, no problem. I trust you. You're a good fella.
Yeah.
Like, what the actual F?
Well, and his love letters with Kim Jong-un and the whole... Oh, dear Lord. Shit. Well, he seems to think he's going to take it with him. He seems to think, like, whoever dies with the most toys wins, and it's sort of like, yeah, but you're on, and I've seen a list of, so I told you, I've been looking at a couple of lists recently, list of top 10, and then even the top 50 worst leaders in history, and worst, I think, here was the metric was how much damage they did to their own country. But worst presidents of the U.S., it's always a contentious one, and usually the current president or the last president is up there for in the public consciousness. Like after George W. Bush, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, he's the worst." It's like, okay, I do get the sentiment, but
I can beat that.
Yeah, Trump is now #1 on most people's lists. It's just like, you know, that's a challenge because we've had some pretty bad presidents. People don't realize we've had some pretty fucking corrupt ones. Trump's on that list, and he hasn't even begun, I think, the legal issues that he's going to end up having to go through.
Oh yeah, yeah.
In his view, he still wins. But you know,
everybody on that side of the fence is convinced all those legal troubles and everything else, that's just a vengeful plot by people who did not appreciate just how brilliant and great and wonderful and kind and loving he was.
And this is why I think that this too is actually why they're feeling a greater kinship with Russia. It's because it's the same attitude, right? It's the same, and we're just going to believe it for the.
I've actually heard some of them say, you know, we should have a leader more like Putin. That's how this country should be run.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I've heard that
we shouldn't have elections in this country. We should have leaders who tell us what to do.
Oh, and they're going through that in Brazil, and I you know.
Yeah. And we somehow have given that mindset, that belief structure, credibility, which just flabbergasts me. You know, it's like, how can you take what this country allegedly stands for and say that those sentiments are, you know, echo those intentions, the founding documents, the entire reason the country exists in the first place, and saying, no, we need to eliminate voting, we need to, you know, mandate that only white Christian males have any say in anything, and it just goes on, heaping nonsense upon nonsense, and we still treat that party, that faction of that party, as if they're reasonable people, not insane. I can't even think of a good term for it, but you know, they're a disease, and I hate to be that pejorative and try to throw people from who are conservative under that bus, but the extreme elements, the MAGA mob, that's what they are. It's a mental illness. It's a cult. It's a.
And it may or may not go. It may or may not be the majority. I don't know. I haven't seen enough reliable data on whether or not it's the majority. But they own the party. They're not. Yeah. They're not. They're in control, and they're in control enough that they're essentially controlling huge swaths of the party, if not the U.S. government when they're in charge. So that's who they are right now until the majority decides to if they're not the majority, and they may be by this point. I don't even know.
Yeah, I think it's a little different. I think what happened is that the real Republicans, if you will, figured out at some point that they were so much losing ground in the election cycle that they had to find some way to co-opt and build this alliance of all these whack job right-wing extremists to give themselves a foundational base on which to build. And they did that, and now they're finding they can't control those people. It was like used to be said about Hitler and the industrialists. The industrialists were all convinced that, you know, Hitler's a flash in the pan, he's a nobody. Yeah, we'll use him for our devices, we can control him. And then they were suddenly, no, that didn't working the way we expected. Oopsies. And I think that's kind of what's going on, is they're on the tiger, desperately clinging, because if you get off, the tiger eats you.
I think it's the marshmallow test. You know? Oh, yeah, yeah. What?
Yeah. Go ahead.
You know what the marshmallow test is?
No, I don't. Please advise me.
It's the single best indicator of future success of any psychological test we have. It's the marshmallow test. Very simple. I will give you 1 marshmallow today, right now, or I'll give you 2 tomorrow. What do you want? People who say I'll take 2 tomorrow are almost universally more successful than people who say I will take 1 today. Reason is they're capable of delaying gratification and inherently, on some level, understand in a way that if they wait, they're going to have a more desirable outcome. And I think what you're seeing is people who are saying, well, I know that this is counter to my values, but I'm so ticked off for the short term, it's okay to, you know, throw their purported beliefs in the U.S. Constitution out the window in order to right the ship in some way. And then, yeah.
I would say, using your analogy of your little marshmallow test, I think what's happened is we've created a 3rd answer to the marshmallow test.
Oh, okay.
I'll give you 1 marshmallow now or 2 marshmallows tomorrow, and this group is saying, well, as long as you take the marshmallows away from that guy, I don't need any marshmallows.
Oh, dear Lord. Yeah, no, I think you got it. Oh. Is that just bitterness, or is,
a
is
combination
there something?
of envy and rage and frustration and the feeling of isolation and alienation, all of that heaped on top of itself. And I don't even think it's necessarily a truly held belief or something they came up with on their own. I think somebody else told them that was the solution. Everything will be better if we take the marshmallows away from those people.
Well, then that's fascism. We're right back to we're right back to finding the enemy. Yeah. Oh, dear Lord. Well, so okay. I wasn't sure whether to sort of along the same lines is Elon Musk and Twitter, which I guess so. Amber Heard's Twitter account vanished. Now, I am not a fan of Amber Heard, and I am no expert, but it
I'll evidence my ignorance. Who is Amber Heard?
Okay. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard were in a relationship. Amber Heard.
Okay. I got you. I got you now. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know the details. I don't need to, but now I know who
she's insane. She's crazy. I've seen enough to you know, I watched the trial. I've been through it.
I'm not
she's
sure
utterly
that
unhinged.
Johnny Depp isn't either, but that's a separate.
He may have his own issues. That's true, but she dated Elon Musk briefly, and nobody really knows how it ended or what happened. Yada yada yada. Elon Musk is now in control of Twitter, and her Twitter account has vanished. Whether she removed it, the implication was he forcibly had her banned, which if he did, was a level of pettiness that
silence her.
Yeah, and he's now presumably this is going to be the Free Speech Network. It's what is it? The uses of the N-word and other racial language have gone up 400%, gone up 400%. So they're now 500% of what it was right before he took over. So, yeah, it looks like he's going to try to turn this into Truth Social. He's told everybody there that he expects their best. The managers have told everyone working there they expect 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you don't, you know, when he culls people, you make those decisions easy. And now they've culled a whole bunch of people. So, the first thing
as we used to say in the Navy, how do we put it? Liberty is secured and work hours are doubled until morale improves.
Until morale improves. I love that. Oh, dear Lord. Well, there's a whole spat of it. I know we were going to, but let me do this. Is entering person 1999. It's that time of night again. Well, thank you, sir, very, very much. We sincerely appreciate it. Thank you for the super chat. Really appreciate it, Xandering. Thank you. So, yeah, I don't know. We can go on to. I mean, there's obviously. I think Twitter's probably gonna, and somebody pointed this out. It may have been you. I forget. It's gonna become. Oh no, it was Xandering actually. It'll fail in as much as it'll lose most of its power. It'll become MySpace, and there you go. I don't see if he's firing as many people as he's firing. They're not going to be able to go through that stuff. But I was actually
17,000 people or something just fired,
and they can't. He can't.
Ridiculous.
And the CEO and the whole, and he's in charge of I think 5 companies at least. He can't now. And Twitter was already pretty bad in a cesspool as it was, so we'll see. YouTube is not much better, but we've had some issues. But between that and Kanye, it seems, and people always. I found, okay, they call it seasonal affective disorder, but I found, the light gets darker, it gets colder, it's harder to go outside, and it affects you, so I've noticed myself, my family, my friends, everybody's starting to feel little, and then I don't want you to make fun of this, man, okay, because this is serious, but Kanye just lost it, man. And I just don't know what to do. I just don't know. I don't know if Kanye can't hold it together. I need a minute. Oh.
Well, I think we should encourage him to call Herschel and see if he can't sort things out between the two of them.
Oh. And I said this, I genuinely do feel bad for Kanye. I'm mocking him, and maybe I shouldn't. It's a mental health issue, and he needs help.
Some people deserve to be mocked, let's be honest.
Well, and he's also got, the other thing is he's got enough money that if he chooses to take care of himself, he can. That's not always something that's easy to do, especially in this country. But it's, yeah, wow. I hope he's, and now apparently all of this is a message from God. It's like, yeah, the message from God is get help.
Yeah. Oh. You have the money. Please find a good psychiatrist.
Oh, dear Lord. Oh, this is between Trump, the MAGA people, and it's all, and I can see why. What's interesting, it's always been interesting to me how much he glommed onto Trump, and he really glommed onto Trump, and now he's I don't think, and I could be wrong here. I'd be curious to get your views. I don't think Trump is racist. I've seen no evidence that he is. I haven't seen any evidence that he's racist. I don't think he objects to racist policies. I don't think he cares about racism one way or another. And I think if the people who support him and who repeat whatever lies he wants, he's more than happy to empower them to do any racist policies or anything that they want to. I think he's more than happy to do that.
See, I think... Yeah. Go ahead, finish your thought. So.
Well, no, you go, because I want to hear this one.
I think you're partially right. I don't think he's necessarily racist in the way we tend to view that term in this country. I think what he is a classist. And as far as he's concerned, unless you're one of the chosen elites with lots and lots of money, which is the only measure of a person in our society, is how much money you have, at least in his view of the world.
Yeah.
And since the bulk of people who do not have lots and lots of money come from various racial, linguistic, religious, whatever you want to call it, backgrounds, they naturally, in his estimation, fall into that zone of contempt. And he has said on multiple occasions how much contempt he holds his own followers in. And I think that's part of what's going on, is his main driving force is, you don't have any money, so you're a bad person. And it's part of the, oh God, what's the term? The new Americanized version of Christianity, the prosperity gospel.
Oh, Jesus, yeah.
Where, yeah, and I think he's, while he may not be a official follower of it, I think his mindset mirrors or echoes, depending on how you want to say it, that line of thinking. So he is convinced that because he's wealthy, he must be a good person. And if you don't have a lot of money, then obviously you're a bad person, because if you were a good person, you'd be wealthy. It doesn't have the religious overtones of prosperity gospel, which is God loves you, that's why you're rich. God hates you, that's why you're poor. He doesn't have that element to it, but it's still the same mental process that leads him to the same kind of conclusion. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think that also fits, because the other thing I was thinking of was like, okay, so he said some extremely racist things about Mexico, but I think, again, I don't think it's that he thinks there's anything inherently, he's not judging them as Mexican in that same sense. I think you're right. I think it's the class, right? Mexico is a poor country compared to ours, so you can say anything and be derogatory of them, and they are worthy of those comments.
Oh, yeah, and he's perfectly happy to hobnob with anybody from the upper classes in Mexico. So
yes. And Kanye West, right? So Kanye West, I don't think he sees as black or white, and I think he doesn't see most people as black. I think he just sees him as he's a guy who has pulled the same con I'm doing on everybody else, and that is worthy of inclusion. And
the other part is, he doesn't care whether you got wealthy through legal or illegal means.
Correct. Well,
it's simply that you got wealthy. So, and we know he has done this. He has lots of ties with organized crime. He's perfectly happy to hobnob around with that group. Doesn't bother him, because they're rich.
I think he actually prefers people who got wealthy by illegal means, because it means that you've accomplished an extra step. You managed to avoid the law. You managed to not get caught. You managed to to do it illegally is a greater expression of power than to do it by legitimate means.
I think there's some truth to that. I'm not sure if it's he likes it because you were illegal in getting it, or if it's because it was simply unethical. And those are two distinctive things.
Yes, yes. I think that's true. So, all right. Well, was there anything else you want to... I do have a story I wanted to tell you, and I'll finish with that in a minute, but I was wondering if there's anything else you wanted to cover while we've been sort of shooting the shit on all of these topics.
I have a few things, but a lot of it pertains to Ukraine. I don't want to go over it now, because we'll be talking to Starsky tomorrow morning. We can talk about it then. No need to... no need to reveal the secret plot lines.
Perfect. I know you're gonna have to leave early, so tomorrow we'll have Starsky. So it's tomorrow 1 p.m. Eastern. We'll let him do his sort of rundown. He does those in like 5 minutes, not even, and he just talks about what's so he'll give us that, and then we'll pass that off to you. And all right, perfect. So we had been talking about sort of institutional. Right before the show started, you know how one part of an organization doesn't really know what the other part is doing. And this is, my father was a criminal defense attorney, and people in jail have nothing but time to try to get out. And the shit that he's seen, and it's just the craziness was utter insanity. So you would remind me of this story. People who've watched this before probably heard this story once or twice before. It's one of my favorites of his stories, and he was a good storyteller. He's sort of where oh, hello, boy. Oh, girl, sorry. Hello there.
Nope, this is the boy.
Oh, that's the boy. Oh, okay. Hi there. Oh, yeah, guy. Somebody wants attention. Yeah, no, you don't get $50 for appearing on stream. You're not a member of SAG. You're not in the guild. Nice try. I will not pay you in kibble. I won't pay you in kibble.
You give me a cookie, I'll be happy.
So he and one of the things that he had, and he was a little jaded, I think, but he also he was very much the look. You're a criminal defense attorney. Your job isn't are they guilty or innocent. That's the jury's job. Your job is to take whatever bullshit they're giving you and give them the best possible defense you can. And so he had gotten a guy who was in, if I recall, it was for murder, and he had this guy as a client before. And the guy had done some shit before, and my father had gotten him off. But you know, he's in for murder. My father figured probably wasn't going to stick. And the day before trial, the prosecutor calls up and says, "I'm letting you know that we're going to present new evidence tomorrow." And my father's like, "Okay, what's the evidence?" He goes, "Your guy confessed 2 nights ago in his cell to his cellmate. Told all the details of the crime, how the whole thing was done." And had details that only the person who did it could have known. So we're going to be presenting that tomorrow. Good luck. Now, for whatever, my father was pissed because he's just sitting there going like he's trying to do the best defense possible. And this guy's running around yapping. And so my father calls up the guy and says, "What the fuck are you doing talking to your cellmate about this shit? You're not supposed to talk to anybody about it." He goes, "I swear to God, I didn't say a word about anything to anybody." Now, first of all, he didn't sit there and say, "Well, I didn't do it, so why would I confess?" So my father right off the bat figured the guy's probably guilty. But he believes him. He believes him that he didn't tell the cellmate. And he's just adamant. He's like, "I swear to God, I didn't tell my cellmate anything." So my father's like, "What the fuck is going on? How?" So he goes and looks up the cellmate just to find out, like, you know, where was he when the murder was committed? Turns out he was in jail. He was serving a 20-year sentence. He's got 1 year left, but he's only served 3. So my dad's like, wait, how does he have only 1 year left? He's only served 3. This is the 4th time his cellmate has confessed to him the details of the crime that only the killer could know, and he called up the ADA and said, "Give me a deal and I will flip on this guy." So he goes and looks. Each time it's a different ADA, and each time he's got the details that only the killer could have known, but he's been in jail the whole time. Nobody gets this lucky. Yes, every now and then somebody gets a cellmate confession, and they go, "This guy's had so many, he's had his sentences reduced so many times, he's about to walk." So my dad's like, "Oh, how the fuck is this happening?" So he calls up the local prison, says, "I need you to toss his cell. We're going to see what's in there." They toss his cell, and they find letterhead from the Dallas district attorney. Turns out that his brother worked in the Dallas DA's office and stole a whole bunch of letterhead. What he would do when he got a new cellmate... Yeah, you're starting to see...
Yeah, I can see where this is going.
Every time he got a new cellmate, he'd go to the cellmate and be like, "Oh, God, my district attorney is, you know, X, Y, and Z. He's a bastard. Who's yours?" Say, "Oh, yeah, the guy who's prosecuting me is this guy." Goes, "Oh, man, what an asshole. Best of luck to you." Then he takes the letterhead, says, "Hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm with the Dallas District Attorney's Office. We hear that you've got this guy in jail, and we're looking at some crimes down here that kind of resemble that, and we think he may have been in the area. Could you send us all his records? Please, just send us his files. We'd love to take a look at it. We'll have the address down at the bottom. Send those as soon as possible, and if we can be of any assistance, we'd love to be. Thank you so much. Sincerely yours, Dallas District Attorney. Please send care of the local jail." Now, the secretaries get shit like this all the time.
For some reason, that didn't raise eyebrows?
It didn't, because the secretaries don't check. What they do is they get these all the time. They get these all the time, so they just send them down to the records department. So she takes one look at this, says, "Oh, yeah, okay, it's the Dallas District Attorney." So she sends it to the records department. The records department gets it. They get things like this all the time, and people who are defending themselves are entitled to have their records sent to the prison. They're sending records to the prison all the time, so they don't read the letter. They just get told that they have to send the records, so they send them to wherever it says on the letter. They don't bother reading the letter. And nobody put two and two together. So the secretary didn't read the address. The people who were sending it to the address didn't read, who was requesting the material. So they go and look, and sure enough, in that guy's assistant district attorney's records is a letter from the DA. So they go back, they find the brother, they track the whole fucking thing down. So there you go. That was. You can see why your story got me thinking of that one, because they don't, and it's just like the two departments. They nobody bothered, and it was a brilliant thing. The only thing I will say, and it's only because, again, the guy my father was defending was probably guilty. My father believed he was guilty, defended him anyway, and followed up on this. Why? Because A, it's his job, and B, he really did believe that the roommate hadn't confessed. The roommate had 3 other cases where he had done this and hadn't gotten caught, and in one of them, he was the sole piece of evidence. All the other evidence had gotten thrown out. So it is entirely possible that the guy was completely innocent, and which is why, by the way, we have people whose job it is to destroy the district attorney's case if they can, because that's how they catch shit like this. So, but this ended up not overturning. What was it? It was it was overturning 4 total convictions, and one of them, it was a sole piece of evidence, was the confession. But it was that strong because, hey. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And the guy was less than a year from walking out on a 20-year. Oh, dear Lord. Yep.
Well, one good story deserves another, so you can close on this one then.
All right.
So one of the jobs I had when I was on active duty is I was an investigator with the DOD Inspector General's office. And my job was investigating whistleblower reprisal cases. Stop me if I've told you this story before. So, anyway, one of the cases revolved around civilian contractors who were working for the Army, and supposedly the reprisal, which was these guys got fired from their jobs, was that these guys had complained to a Army Corps of Engineers official, telling them about violations that were going on in executing the work that was being done. Incidentally, the work that was being done was dirt burning, removing contaminants from soil.
Oh, okay.
Old, napalm test pits or chemical weapon stuff, whatever. They're purifying the soil. They run it through a giant conveyor belt incinerator thing, and they burn the soil. So they went in and talked to this Corps of Engineers guy and told him, these are the things that the company's doing wrong, and the next day they were fired. And they allege it's because they'd gone in and made these complaints about the illegal activities the company was involved with. So we started pulling the thread, and one of the questions I asked was, well, when did you become aware they were doing this? Oh, heck, we knew that they were doing these illegal things within the first couple of days we started working here. Well, why did it take you 10 months before you reported it? And I love this line. Well, Mr. McMillan, they were paying me $25 an hour. I'd lick a toilet bowl clean with my tongue for 25 bucks an hour.
Ooh.
And, you know, to me, that was everything. It was like, I didn't care less that they were breaking the law. In fact, I was all in favor of it, except they were going to fire me because I was showing up to work late and refusing to work overtime that they were asking me to do, even though it was paid overtime, et cetera, just all these other reasons. So they went and created this false protected communication by rushing in just before they knew they were going to get fired and reporting all these things. So it was, but I love that line because it, to me, kind of like what you're saying with your story, people will do anything if it benefits them. They don't really care. All they care about is the personal profit of the situation, whether it's profiting by having your sentence reduced, whether it's profiting because you're employed by a company that's paying you a lot more than you've ever seen in your life before, et cetera, et cetera.
I used to see the chasm between people as wide as the Grand Canyon, and that includes the left, the right, and all of these other things. But, you know, you had been talking about the authoritarian on the far left and maybe sort of the anarchist on the far right. Sorry, the other way around. But at any rate, and then, you know, these sort of extremes. And
but those other ones do exist.
Well, and they're all still, the behavior is actually still, you know, there's an attitude that's a bit different, but the behavior still is so similar and has so much in common that instead of looking at some of these differences as wide as the Grand Canyon, there's as narrow as a crack on the sidewalk. It's really, it's amazing how much more we have in common, and that's, you know, be a bit of a scary thing too. Oh God, we have a troll in the we've tried to ban this guy a couple of times. Let's see, discovering ancient history. Oh God, who cares about history? With Pat Loger. So there's some Pat Logger, I don't know, but yeah. Hey, Pat, good to see you.
He's low and he's an integer.
He's low and he's an exactly. And he wants to know why you're talking with a commie.
He didn't clarify which one of us is the commie.
Exactly. I have a feeling it's me.
Oh, okay.
That's going to be my guess. I've spoken with him enough. I've spoken with him enough that I have a feeling he's got some idea of yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lance. It was another great show. I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern. We're gonna have Starsky back on, and we're gonna find out what's going on. You've already got some questions for him, which I appreciate, and I've got a few questions, and we're going to looks like we're going to see what's been going on. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. And then on Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have our patron hangout. Anyone who's a patron or a supporter, if you're a member of the channel, if you've in fact, even if you've ever really donated a super chat or anything like that, we let you into the patron hangouts. It will be 9 p.m. Eastern, and then on Tuesday we're going to be covering the midterm elections, so we're going to start with that live, probably about a half hour before the first polls close. It's always a hell of finding out when the first polls close is a lot harder than it looks because all times are local. So it's like, wait a minute, which time zone? And then they're closing and then there's one exception to the daylight savings, but they're in the part that doesn't recognize that. It's insane. But my suspicion is around 6:30 on Tuesday. We'll have more for you on that as the date approaches. Come into the Discord. You can find out what we're going to be doing there. I am not going to be available for the Discord later, but yeah, I know you sometimes like to hang out after these shows on the Discord. So if you feel like stopping by, please do. I'm sure there are people who would like to say hi, including Mr. Lewinsky there, who I think would love to say hi to you. So,
sure.
All right.
I'll try to.
Yes, I called him Pat Lewinsky. All right. Thank you so much. Have a marvelous evening, and we will see you all tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern, for our weekly update with Operator Starsky. Have a good night, all.